Okay. Thanks for coming this morning. Good morning, Megan, Roisin, Joseph. Through the Planning the Unseen extract. And you're going to write it as we go through it. So has everyone got paper to hand? And it's almost like you're going to write a paragraph at a time. Okay. And then at the end of it, as you've written it, I'll summarize some of the things you should have talked about. Okay. The deal with this one is that you're doing close analysis and you're writing a critical appreciation, which means you're looking at the writer's decisions and the effect of those decisions. You're looking at AO2 language, obviously the lexis, the words, the metaphors, the verbs, the adjectives that create atmosphere, but you're looking at the form as well. You're looking at its Gothic form, what makes it Gothic. You're also looking at any other literary forms that you see in detective fiction or journals. You're also looking at structure. So you have to talk about the narrative. So maybe make a note of that. You have to talk about the narrative structure. And you have to talk about the use of time, because that's structural as well. Structure could also be looking at things like opposites and parallels that you see within the text. Okay, I'm getting very bored of the sound of my own voice. I imagine you are too. You're going to hopefully give me some answers to some of these things. Okay. I'd be really grateful for it. So let's move on. What are we looking at today? I'm going to show you the opening screen of the text that we're looking at. I want you to tell me what you could possibly say about the title and what makes it Gothic and anything else of interest about the title. Okay. Because I think in Gothic extracts, it's good to start wide, broad, and then become more narrow and microscopic in looking at the text. So you're going to be given the title and the date of the text. Broadly, can you contextualize and say things about the extract in terms of its context, of its time period, and perhaps its title? So here we go. This is the first page of the text that we're looking at today. It's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. What would you say about the full title? The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Secondly, this text is from 1886. Right. Morning, Sarah and Amelia. Okay, who would like to kick off? Camilla's here. Well done, Camilla. What would you like to say?
Maybe about the date, that it's in the late Gothic period, and that's like the Gothic, where the Gothic genre was like used to display Victorian cultural fears.
Yeah, that's a nice point. Yes. Can we say anything more about that? I suppose it's it's like the late Victorian wave of Gothic, isn't it? So often demonstrating Gothic or end of century anxieties. Anything else we could add to that? Good point to start us off, Camilla. Joseph. Want to say anything?
I was going to say about the title, about the strange case, offers a sense of ambiguity and obscurity.
Yes, so the title might hint at some kind of Gothic elements in it. Good point. Strange, obscurity or ambiguity. We're not quite clear. What else could we say? What does the strange case suggest? What does case suggest? Roisin?
Could it be like a legal case or something related to the law?
Could be. What other cases?
Or a scientific case. Maybe it's an experiment.
Yeah. So it could be a scientific experiment. So picking up on the individual word, what other texts seem to deal with science and the dangers of science? What other Gothic texts deal with science? Elif? Roisin?
Frankenstein.
Thank you, Chisholm. Good. Yes, Frankenstein. So you could make a link there to another text. You're taking Camilla's point about contextualizing it late 18th late 19th century Gothic, maybe dealing with anxieties about scientific development at the time. And we get that broadly from the title and the date. Okay. What about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? How is this Gothic? Fergal. Fergal's mic isn't working, so he's typing. Participants. Right. Okay. Duality. Good. Okay. Can we go further than that? Can anyone take it any further? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. How can we go further than Ananya? Yeah? Ananya? Oh, you're typing. The contrast between Doctor and Mr. Interesting. Yes. So we've got the opposites. Sarah says, guess the differences between the statuses. Yes. So we've got clear divisions of class, perhaps in Victorian times. What else? What else does this suggest about a Gothic text that we've got Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Virgil again. Okay. Perhaps we could talk about the double identity, if you like. The idea of two personas. Where else do we get that in Gothic fiction? Simi? Elif?
Dorian Gray.
Dorian Gray. Good. So this, what makes this typically Gothic then? Virgil? If you're typing your answer, you don't have to put your hand up. You can just type in the answer and I'll relay it to the class. Okay. So maybe we've got aspects of what here? What makes this typically Gothic? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Supernatural. Good. So we've got duality, the supernatural. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, opposites, if you like. Double identities. Okay. You can link it to Frankenstein and the development of science and the dangers of science, the specific idea of good and evil and the idea of the doppelganger. Thank you, Ananya. So that takes us, that's just, so you should be writing that paragraph now. What could you say merely about the title and the date? You should be doing that. Okay, I'm going to move on, leave a gap, fill in what we've talked about as we're writing. Let's move on to the next slide. So that's your way. Start broad and then move in. You should have all read the 3 waves of Gothic in this book, The Gothic by the Cornell Short Guide. You access that. I've sent you countless emails with the link to it. It's only about 30 pages, but this will be essential for answering this particular question. Okay, so please do. Okay, so now we've talked about what makes this text typically Gothic. Now we're going to look at, well, what conventions of Gothics do we see in this text? Does the extract seem to be particular of a particular wave or era? So Camilla hinted at it from the title. Now we're going to look at the extract and see what essentially is Gothic in this extract here. And I'm breaking it down into paragraphs. Okay. When we look at the first paragraph, what use is made of the 5 senses, okay, placing us in the world of the Gothic? And as we're doing it, what patterns do you see in the words? Sometimes you might see words of similar meanings in the passage, or opposites perhaps, okay? And maybe you might see things related to some of the Gothic themes that we've looked at before: entrapment, darkness, obscurity, isolation, decay, foreshadowing of doom, unease, tensions, things like this. So we're looking to highlight specific words now, okay? And what could you say perhaps about the tone and the attitude of the characters? Let's look at one thing first and just consider, what could you say about this extract here? Okay, I'm going to give you a minute to read it. I'm going to get up, shake my legs. Right then. Okay, who would like to say something about this extract first of all? What do you find of interest in the opening of the extract? I'd like a bit of to in and fro in here if possible, please. Otherwise, it's just me talking to myself in my kitchen like a nutter. Sarah, what might you say about this extract? Okay, let's put it another way. Thanks, Sarah. The fear of science, question mark. He's aware he's risking death. Yeah, that's a good point. Let's talk what's actually happening in this extract. If we were to summarize it in one sentence, I'll get onto your point in a moment, Ananya. What do you understand to be going on, Chisholm?
Is he if he's wondering if he should take the drug or not? I think it's very confusing. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, so I think that's a valid thing to say, Chisholm. So we start off broad. What's actually happened? Okay, and I would just summarize it here. The narrator or the speaker is talking about a time he did an experiment and he prepared his tincture. Does any scientist know what a tincture is?
I think it's when you put a plant or animal in like alcohol or something to preserve it.
Yeah, so it's he prepared his kind of medical compound, his tincture. He purchased it at once from a firm of chemists. He compounded the elements together. He watched them boil and smoked in the glass. And what did he do? He drank a potion. Okay, so on the basic level, work out what's happened in the extract. So it's not thinking about should I do something. This has actually happened. So the speaker, I would just have a sentence describing the extract. The speaker is recounting the time he did an experiment and drank a potion. Just one sentence, okay? Maybe write that down. Now, he's looking back on events. What does he feel about doing it, do you think, then? Is there any indication as to how he felt about doing the experiment? And Nanya says there is a lot of hesitation and uncertainty in the narrator's speech, which increases the reader's anxiety about what he would do. Good. How else does he feel about this experiment? What else suggests his feeling? Fergal. Just write it, Fergal. Your hand is still up, sorry. He described it. Do you see my mouse? Can you see my mouse moving, by the way? Chisholm.
He described it as a temptation, which suggests that even though he's reluctant to do it, he wants to find out what could happen if he drank the potion, which he did.
Very good. What makes this Gothic? Chisholm, you're muted. Carry on. What makes this Gothic?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Anyone? Temptation. What makes that Gothic? Anybody?
Could you say it's one of the sins?
Yeah. Gothic fiction deals with transgressions, sins, and strong desires, temptations to do things. What does he think about the night he did it? He calls it late one accursed night. How do you think he feels about that now, looking back in the present? Regine?
Well, curse means like a cursed doom, so maybe it's foreshadowing like that this potion has led to maybe some sort of doom in his life, or led to something awful happening.
Yes.
Outcome.
Good. And so there's a sense of like foreshadowing for the reader. We know this doesn't work out so well. He calls it an accursed night. Let's look at the top of the extract. He talks about, well, I risk death. He talks about the drug. How does he describe the drug and what it does? Joseph.
He said that the drug was very potent and it could shake the very fortress of his identity.
Okay, good. The drug that, so second line, so potently controlled. What word class is potently, Joseph?
Potently is an adverb.
Very good. The more you get into the habit of, when you quote, using the word class, the adverb potently, it makes you look much more professional and academic. So do know the differences between adverbs, verbs, adjectives, and nouns, and abstract nouns. He says it shakes the very fortress of identity. What kind of literary technique is used there? Roisin?
A metaphor.
Good. So identify metaphors where you see them. Again, the drug is described as really powerful. It can break the fortress of identity. And which is what Fergal talks about, takes away his identity. So what can we say about the sentence length? It's really long sentences. I had long since prepared my tincture. I purchased at once from a firm of wholesale chemists a large quantity of a particular which I knew from my experiments to be the last ingredients required. And late one night I compounded the elements. I watched them boil, smoked together in the glass, and when the ebullition, the mixture had subsided, or the smoke had subsided, with a strong glow of courage, drank off the potion. What does this remind us of, Elif?
I was going to say, like, the long sentences increases the tension and the suspense, is like the reader's waiting to see what happens and like if he drinks the potion or not.
Very good. It's almost worth writing that down about the effect of long sentences. Equally, the Victorian times, they did use long, multi-clausal, complex sentences with subordinate clauses. What is he describing here that maybe any of you who do sciences might recognize? What's he describing? Elif.
the mixture.
Yeah, it's almost like he's describing the experiment, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's describing what he put in it. It's like an observation of what he did. And because it's from a first person narrative, it's the doctor himself who's recounting his action in a scientific way. So again, the writing is almost scientific in its observations of detail and procedures. Where else do we get that sense of scientific writing, observations, detail, and specifics in other Gothic texts that you've looked at? What other book have you read in which there is scientific journals recording observations in precise scientific ways? Dracula, thank you, Chisholm. So you elaborate, you show what you can see here. And again, why do Gothic writers tend to use science and write in scientific ways, Sarah? Okay, I'll answer that. I'm not sure. That's fine. That's fine. I think they add a degree of accuracy and verisimilitude and a degree of making this real. Why do they try and make things real, Camilla?
Maybe because in the time when it was written, it was feared a bit as well. So they wanted to tell people more about it.
Yeah, okay. So it sort of reflects those fears of scientific discovery. But also, Gothic fiction is trying to make us scared. And so if it makes us seem like something is real and realistic, it makes it more terrifying for the reader as well. So I think that's related. So the paragraph you should be writing now should be talking about maybe the word choices being used, maybe the metaphors that you see, the long sentences and the effect of them. The way it's described in such a scientific way to add verisimilitude or reality, making it more terrifying. But there's also hints at transgression in accursed, and also there's that sense of temptation. Let's move on. So, characterization, what can we say so far? There's long, precise, complex sentences which kind of remind us that the narrator is a scientist. They're describing the actions in very methodical ways. But again, there's a sense of, there's maybe a touch of regret, this accursed night when it happened. Let's move on. Now we're going to look for maybe parallels and opposites within the text and see what you can find. Sometimes these could be outside exteriors in contrast to inside exteriors, or different kinds of emotions, or maybe an opposite and parallels of events. So you're looking for deliberate patterns, repetition in the extract. Let's look at this extract and see what you could say. Okay, I'd like you to read it to yourself. I'll give you a minute or two to read it. Okay, who would like to start on this one? I'd appreciate different people talking. Camilla, thank you.
I guess this paragraph is kind of Dr. Jekyll going through his transformation and turning into Hyde. And like Hyde could be like seen as his doppelganger and like maybe his alter ego.
Right. Now that's a good summary of what's happening in this paragraph. What other texts might you get transformation, Camilla?
Dracula, the Bloody Chamber.
Mhm. So transformations seem to be particularly Gothic. You can give one specific example of transformation and its effect. What would it be?
Maybe Lucy turning into a vampire and how she turns different.
In what way different?
As in the way she acts, physically as well, different.
Very good, very good. Okay, so what could we say about the transformations here, Ananya? What do you find interesting about that? Do you see any patterns? Thanks, Camilla. They seem to be emphasizing the change in him through adjectives like younger, lighter, and happier, which, yeah, seem positive, don't they? So there's some positive, agreeable sensations that are going on. Incredibly sweet. Something strange in my sensations. What else is happening? Amelia? Amelia? Emily? I don't know if you've got your muted. Ananya says, perhaps it's building up the boundary between the evil and good in him. Okay, that's interesting. So we've got positive emotions. Is there anything that suggests the opposite? We're looking at parallels and opposites. What opposites do you see?
Oh wait, sorry.
No, go
on. Yeah, when he says, "I knew myself at the first breath of this new life," and normally like a first breath is kind of like associated with like, and a new life is associated with like a child, and
yeah,
it's normally associated with like innocence and kind of purity, but he goes after like setting up this kind of like statement, he then goes to be more wicked and tenfold more wicked, so it creates a massive contrast between how his new life is actually way more evil, so that creates like, opposite.
Very good, Ben. Yeah, so this rebirth, usually associated, birth is associated with innocence. We've got the complete opposite here with wicked, original evil, reminding us of original sin, perhaps. Again, the idea of exploring evil and strong emotions is typically Gothic, that you could compare to another text. What would you say, Roisin, about in that moment I was braced and it delighted me like wine? Third line from the bottom. You might be muted.
Which line was it again?
Third line from the bottom. In that moment, braced, and it delighted me like wine.
I guess it's almost like a drug to him, and it kind of distorts all his senses because wine is alcohol, and it kind of does that to people.
And what literary technique? Proceed it with a literary technique.
It's the use of a simile.
Yeah. Very good. So the use of, this is how I would write it. The use of the simile delighted me like wine, quote, suggests he's intoxicated. It's like a drug to him, and he's caught up in the emotion of evil. Okay. So again, we've got lots of references to a rebirth, the freshness, the original sin, the being reborn. Again, it's exalting, it's positive, and it deals with, as Chisholm says, transformation and the idea of exploring evil. All right, let's move on. I need to sometimes prod you to herald things with the language features that you see. AO1 is terminology on this question. I really want to go into this exam being able to know your similes from your metaphors and knowing your prepositions from your adverbs. And so it's important that you swat up on those things. And so making sure you're using and highlighting language features and their effects. So again, like the simile of intoxicated like wine. Okay, I'm going to read this time. And as I read it, I want you to think what you would say about this paragraph in the extract. What you might say about the language features of the writer and their effect, and what you might say also about how you might compare this with other Gothic texts. You're demonstrating your knowledge of a wide range of Gothic texts. There was no mirror at that date in my room. That which stands beside me as I write was brought there later on, and for the very purpose of these transformations. At the time, there was no mirror. The night, however, was far gone into the morning. The morning, black as it was nearly ripe for the conception of the day. The inmates of my house were locked in the most rigorous hours of slumber, and I, determined, flushed as I was with hope and triumph, to venture out in my new shape as far as to my bedroom. I crossed the yard wherein the constellations looked down upon me. I could have thought with wonder, first creature of that sort that their unsleeping vigilance had yet disclosed to them. I stole through the corridors, a stranger in my own house, and coming to my room, I saw for the first time the appearance of Edward Hyde. What do you find interesting as a piece of Gothic writing in this paragraph? Not all at once. Rishi.
How he describes the morning black as it was. I guess it gives a mysterious atmosphere and eeriness to the eerie tone, because I guess in the morning it's supposed to be bright and you can see more clearly, but in this case it's still more deserted and sinister. And I guess dark is associated with secrets.
Yes, exactly. And that sense of obscurity, things happening in the darkness. Simi, he called the people that live with him inmates. Yeah, suggesting jail and entrapment. That's a really nice point. Again, highlighting just that sense of picking up on one word. And again, entrapment, as we know, is a deliberate kind of Gothic motif, isn't it? Thank you, Simi. Would anyone like to add anything else? If you can't use your mic, obviously just type away and I'll read out what you've got. Chisholm.
He says that he's a stranger in his own house, which emphasizes his transformation.
Yeah, yeah. What else does it emphasize that he's a stranger in his house? What else is it emphasizing? His transformation, but what else is it also emphasizing? This idea he lives with other people, but he's a stranger in his own home. Yes, he's emphasizing how he's become somebody else, Edward Hyde. What might we say about his loneliness? Yes, or isolation, Anonia. Again, this sense of being alienated from other people. He's not just transformed physically, perhaps in his personality, he's transformed as well. Come on then, what would you say about the names Edward Hyde? Dorian Gray. Frankenstein's monster. Dracula. What would you say about the names in Gothic texts? Hyde maybe adds to that sense of him hidden away, side that we hide away from us, the evil that we all possess, perhaps. Dorian Gray, grey, mixture of black and white, good and evil. Dracula, the name, the proper noun, emphasizes his foreignness, perhaps his, his not from Western Europe, not from England. Frankenstein's monster doesn't have a name. Again, he's created, but he's not given an identity. Okay, it's the symbol of his mistreatment. So there's lots of symbolism in characters' names. Okay, it's worth considering that. Dickens, for instance, always in the Victorian period, his names conjured up something about what the character was like. There was a teacher in one of the novels called Mr. Thwackum. What did that suggest about him? Exactly. It's self-evident, isn't it? He's probably quite violent. Okay, good. What would I say about this? What is the mirror of Erised? Come on. What is the mirror of Erised? I know you've read it. Who looks in the mirror of Erised? Maybe you haven't read it. Harry Potter looks in the mirror. Why are mirrors always seen in why are mirrors always seen in, thank you, Tism, in Gothic fiction, do you think? Why do we often see mirrors? They use the motif of the mirror, says Amelie, also seen in Dracula, the Bloody Chamber and Wolf Alice. That's good, yes. So think about where you've seen these things. Dracula can't be seen in a mirror, again, highlighting his abhuman nature. Wolf Alice starts to gain self-discovery when she looks in the mirror. Perhaps also does the girl in the Bloody Chamber story. She discovers her new self. This idea of transformation is brought on by looking in a mirror. And Amelie says, links to the things about your character that you might not want, that are forbidden or taboo to society. So maybe we start to see the real sense of ourselves in mirrors. And that's why he had no mirror at the beginning, but then he got a mirror because he's fascinated by his own transformation. So we've talked about the blackness, and you can talk about texts that have similar things. I crossed the yard where in the constellations the stars look down on me. The first creature, notice how he calls himself a creature. What could you say about this word? Third line from the bottom. I stole through the corridors. What does that mean? I stole through the corridors. First of all, what word class is it? I stole through the corridors. Help me out here, guys. You're a tough audience. Right, a verb, thank you. What would you say about that verb choice? Loneliness, perhaps? Yes. What's the difference between I walked through the corridor, I stole through the corridor? Amelie? Joseph? Fergal? He's acting like an intruder in his own house. So good. Always look, write this down, right? Always look at the verb choice. I stole through the corridors. It suggests he's like an intruder in his own home. It suggests he's sneaky, he's hiding, he's devious. Simi says he's already criminalized himself in a way. That's a really good point, Simi. He's actually looking back at himself. Remember, he's looking back at an earlier time, recounting this event, and the way he describes it, he's describing himself almost like a criminal. Perfect. And we get that from identifying one verb and then elaborating on it. So maybe write that down as an example, okay? The verb, I stole. suggests he's already criminalized himself in a way. That's a nice point. He's acting like an intruder in his own home. The names Hyde, obviously. Dorian Gray, Dorian, I think, comes from the idea of a Doric column on a Greek temple. They're sometimes called Doric columns, and I think that's like something beautiful, Dorian. But then there's Gray, there's aspects to him. All right, then, let's move on. The use of the doppelganger. Well, we've talked about this, haven't we? The idea of the doppelganger is in some way a revenant of a secret come back to haunt us, or an exterior expression of terror, guilt, or paranoia, or perhaps the exploration of our true selves. There was a quote I saw from Oscar Wilde the other day. It says, in himself, a man will never tell the truth, but give a man a mask and he will tell you the truth. And it's the idea that the late Victorians were particularly interested in this idea of having different identities. It's interesting that these late Victorian novels are kind of dealing with double identities, and maybe that reflects the kind of Victorian hypocrisy of having one respectable image of ourselves for the public and for the outside world, and then having another identity, which is our internal world, perhaps a monstrous person that we keep hidden from view. And in the age of Victorian respectability, that's something to consider, this idea of emphasis on respectability and outside image in the Victorian times, and the real self is something that is a recurring motif. So maybe make a note of that in terms of why are doppelgangers so common in late Victorian fiction. Okay, we've talked a little bit about the narrative. Okay, you've got to get your head around it. Who's telling the story? Who is the speaker? And what is the time period? Are they looking back on events? Okay. I'm going to show you another extract now. Remember, the narrator in the Bloody Chamber story is the woman herself, but she's an older woman looking back on her younger self. So she can bring a degree of experience and reflection to it. So let's look at the narrative here in this extract and what you might say about it. I must here speak by theory alone, saying not that which I know, but that which I suppose to be most probable. The evil side of my nature, to which I had now transferred the stamping efficacy or efficiency, was less robust and less developed than the good, which I had just deposed. Again, in the course of my life, which had been, after all, 9/10 a life of effort, virtue, and control, it had been much less exercised and much less exhausted. And hence, as I think, it came about that Edward Hyde was so much smaller, slighter, and younger than Henry Jekyll. Okay, so what kind of narrative do we have here? And what could we say about the narrator? What do you notice about the narrator from the narrative here? Alif, would you like to say anything? Chisholm says, yes, let's start with that. It's a first-person narrative. Why do we use first-person narratives? What's the effect of them?
I think it shows what the person's probably thinking, and we can see things really from their perspective. Right, good. So we want to write that down, this first person narrative. We see it from their perspective. We have an intimate relationship with this character. And Anya says this is a first person narrative, but he still seems to carry an objective quality in his speech. That's interesting. Would you like to elaborate on that? So it's a first person narrative. He's being quite objective. What's he being objective about? Yes, he's aware of both sides of his character, isn't he? He's kind of observing himself in quite a detached
objective way. Why might that be? Why is he observing himself in this scientific experiment in quite a detached way in some ways? Why is he looking at his change in an objective way? Perhaps the theme of science, says Ananya. Yes, perhaps. And let's not forget, the narrator is a doctor. And so he's describing events in a detached way, almost like a doctor observing an experiment. Bear that in mind. Maybe we could also suggest that he is almost abandoning his own personality. Yes, maybe there's something evil in the detachment of what he's doing. And he's looking at it from an outside perspective. What, a little bit like a serial killer looks back at their events in quite a rational, objective way, without any judgment. That would be interesting. Anyone got anything else to say about this? Virgil, sorry, I can't quite hear you very well. No, I can't hear you there, Virgil. Right, and I'll relate it to the class. Right, so think about how the story is told. Who is telling the story? Is it a first-person narrative? And the effects of that to give us an immediate, almost intimate relationship with that speaker. And we see their gradual but we see in this narrative a quite detached, almost unemotional perspective. Like as Ananya says, he's abandoning his own character, his own personality, and just interested more in the transformation rather than the morality of what he's doing. Okay, rather than me reading it out, see if you can say any more about the continuation of this narrative now in this extract. Okay, so this narrative, this part of the narrative, the speaker, or the narrator is describing his own countenance, his own face, looking in detail at it. What judgments does he make here? Which face does he prefer? People always say they've got a better side, don't they? Left side or right side. What side does Dr. Jekyll prefer? What do you understand? Simi?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think that we can see like elements of, I think it's pronounced physiognomy, outward appearance going on inside. Because well, right now Hyde hasn't even done anything, and he's already been like generalized as being evil and just being just the bad side of Jekyll.
That's a really nice point. What other texts might we see the internal character is reflected externally?
Dracula.
Yes.
He
Yeah.
appears to be strong on the outside, but then when you actually get to know him, he's a vampire.
Yeah. There's something kind of grotesque about his features, isn't there? And about his breath and about, you know, his touch and everything. External kind of appearance almost reflects internal corruption. And we see that here. That's a nice point to accept. Ananya says it's uncanny how aware he is of accepting his evil side. Does he prefer his evil side? And if so, where's the evidence for that? Chisholm.
He said that he had no repugnance of his evil side, but he actually accepted it. So he's not I don't know, but it seems like he's not afraid of his evil side. He's just welcoming it as part of something that's natural to him.
Very good. Yes. And in my eyes, in my evil eyes, it bore a livelier image of the spirit. It seems more expressive and single than the imperfect, divided countenance I had hitherto accustomed to call mine. He prefers this image. He says it's livelier. It's a lively image of the spirit. So he's observing dispassionately his own evilness and welcoming it. Okay, let me ask you if you could identify the literary device used in the first sentence. Did anyone recognize that device? Personification, thank you, Ananya. Yes. Good shone on the face of the other. Yeah, plainly on the face of the other. I would also call that a sentence that is antithesis or an antithetical sentence. Can anyone tell me what antithesis is?
Is it the opposite of something?
It's a sentence which has two opposing opposite meanings, yes. As good shone on the countenance of one, evil was written on the face of the other. So a sentence with two opposing ideas. And again, why? Well, this is a book about somebody who has two opposing personalities. So be aware of the literary techniques being used. Okay, very good. Let's move on. We're getting there. Boom. We've talked a little bit about sentences and how suspense is created. Long sentences slow down the pace and increase the tension. Short sentences create a fast pace and perhaps mimic emotions. Bear that in mind when you look at sentences. Remember, why do we have text that suggests suspense? Why do we have text that show us the transformation rather than tell us what the character does? They play on our sense of unease. Where is the growing sense of terror in this extract, do you think, from what we've read so far? Where is the growing sense of unease and terror in the extract that we've read so far? Elif? Roisin? What are we being forced to imagine rather than being told?
I guess that the potion hasn't brought a good outcome. It's made him evil, and it's also made him prefer his evil side rather than his original good self. Yeah,
and what does this force us to imagine what will happen, rather than we are told what's going to happen?
That he's going to maybe terrorize his local area and cause pain for people.
Yes. And so we're not told what he's done or what he's done, but rather we're imagining the potential evil that he could do. And Hyde's appearance is ambiguous. Yes, we're not told exactly. That's a good point, Simi. We're not told exactly how he looks, but rather the effect of how he looks on. We're not given specifics, are we? So we imagine the appearance of Hyde. And as Edgar Allan Poe was interested in the terror of the mind, Poe taps into the idea that our imagination is more terrifying than anything that can be written. So always look for that sense of ambiguity, of not being told, of showing rather than telling us everything, and how that forces the reader to imagine what happens, and that's more terrifying. Remember the key phrase, the terror of the mind. Right. Okay. Thank you for your time today. We're moving on to the last paragraph, and we're looking at the ending of this paragraph. Always have a paragraph that kind of deals with the ending of the extract. Don't just fade out. Many students don't deal with the end paragraph at all. By dealing with the end, you're often dealing with structure as well. So consider how does the extract change from the beginning? Where is the turning point? what has happened. And it's usually the ending of the extract that the examiners choose is different to the beginning. So consider how this extract has shifted. Let's look at the last paragraph now. And in so far, I was doubtless right. I have observed wore the semblance would hide, none could come near to me at first, without a visible misgiving of the flesh. This, as I take it, was because all human beings, as we meet them, are commingled out of good and evil, and Edward Hyde, alone in the ranks of mankind, was pure evil. Okay. So this is the last extract. What might you say about this extract? Oisin.
He seems more confident than he was at the beginning. At the beginning, he was hesitant and he was worried about the risk of death. Whereas now he's like, he believes how right he is, and he kind of like enjoys that his new persona, Edward Hyde, is pure evil, and it makes people fearful of being with him.
That's nice to sort of show the transformation of the extract, what happens from the beginning and how it changes at the end. Where's your evidence that he seems to enjoy it? I'm not disagreeing with you, by the way.
Here he was, I was doubtlessly right. Or
yes, yeah, it could be that. Again,
I wore the semblance of Edward Hyde.
Yeah. What's the most interesting word in this sentence? I have observed that when I wore the semblance of Edward Hyde. It's the most interesting word there.
Wore is almost.
What word class is it?
A verb.
Yeah. What's the effect of that when I wore?
It's almost like he's acting or taking on a role, kind of links to Macbeth with using clothing, the motif of clothing.
Yeah, that's a nice point. Macbeth, I think, is a very Gothic text, isn't it? So it suggests rather like a cloak. He wears this persona. Maybe he enjoys it, rather like we enjoy wearing certain clothes. He doesn't care that people actually hate seeing him. They have a visible misgiving of the flesh. They grow cold just looking at him. He doesn't mind, does he? He seems quite content with that. This, as I take it, was because I was pure evil. Again, how is that last sentence particularly Gothic? Fergal, Camilla, Joseph, Elif? Anyone? Chisholm.
He said Edward Hyde was alone in the ranks of mankind, so that could suggest isolation and loneliness.
Yes, very good. So that sense of alienation, isolation from everyone, from the whole ranks of mankind. Who else is alone in the ranks of mankind? Who else is isolated and alone in the ranks of mankind? And is deemed evil, pure evil by their maker?
Frankenstein's creature.
Yeah, good point. So there's a nice contrast there. Frankenstein's creature sees what he's created as pure evil. Here, Dr. Jekyll sees himself as transformed into pure evil. Gothic texts like to explore exploration. They like to explore strong emotions and the contrast between good and evil, the liminal between good and evil. But here, Edward Hyde thinks he's crossed over that liminal, and now he's pure evil. He's unlike mankind, which is made of good and evil. He's something else. He's something abhuman. He's transformed himself into something that no other human is. So we've got isolation, alienation, explorations of passionate emotions, temptation, exploration of evil. And again, that sense of us possessing two identities is very late Victorian. That, I think, takes us to the end of this extract. You've already got this information in the previous email. Before we finish, has anyone got any other points they wish to bring up? Or any questions they want to ask me before we finish this lesson? Okay. You may have seen an email from me, and if I didn't get an email response from you, it's because you're not interested. But I have one opportunity in which I'm going to go into college on Friday, and I'm seeing students between 10 and 11:30, and I'm going to go through a checklist with you of things that you need to know well before we go into A2. I'll probably go over that innocence essay that many of you answered for Harriet, and just answer any questions about what you should do. I'm allowed to have 10 people in class, but I've got to give people, I've got to give college their names by 1:30 today, and I can only have 10. I've got 7 spaces left. Would any of you feel that you would like to come in? There's really no pressure on you. It's only if you wanted to. I've got 7 spaces. Would anyone wish to join us at 10 to 11 on Friday morning? There'll be a class of about 10 of us. We have to social distance, obviously. Okay. So I'll take that as no. Okay, good. Right. Thanks very much for coming today. And I found that really productive. I hope you did too. It might be an idea for you to write up the paragraphs based on this. I will send you a video of this lesson sometime later today. Okay, thanks a lot for your time. Have a lovely day and stay healthy, everyone. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Yeah.